much for joining me and for, I guess, indulging me, whatever this is. But I'm really grateful to be here to share this work with you and hopefully, I don't know, share some insights. I hope to open the floor if I'm fast enough talking, which I likely won't be, talk a lot, but I hope that there will be space to answer whatever questions you might have. And more importantly, I'd love to hear from you on your take and your thoughts on this topic because I'll give you just a brief sort of rundown of where I'm coming from personally. Um, Obviously, I'm a psychology professor, so as a professor, I run into this. As a researcher, I also have some queries specific to not just, ethical use of AI is a big thing, obviously, but I also feel like there's a lot of misunderstandings whenever people are making decisions around what to do about ChatGPT, for instance, in their classrooms or in their assignments. Those kinds of decisions are often made based on any number of things. Some of those things happen to be hearsay, some of them are gut feelings, some of them are research. So you mix all of those together and then people make decisions accordingly. When I say people, I mean not just individual professors, but entire institutions, right? So we have institutional decisions being made left, right, and sideways about the use of chatbots, ChatGPT primarily, but there are others, of course. So what I wanted to do is look at an area that I didn't quite see talked about as much in the literature, which is sort of the intentionality and the emotional drive behind the different encounters with these kinds of tools experienced on both sides of the seeming divide between professors and students, right? And very specific to this sort of dialectic, but not necessarily confined to that. We can certainly see how this would matter in other realms, right? So the way that I want to break this down, oh, that's not fun at all. Why is that there? Well, underneath it says confessional. Um, well, if I move this, does that go away? No. How do I hide it?
They click the ads.
Oh, I click the ads. Boo. All better. Well, this is just going to be our companion. That's fine. So basically, I want to walk you through these four parts. The issue at hand, as I see it, I mean, people could describe it otherwise, then the study that I'm not only going to share with you, but am still conducting, and then the findings, and then the next steps, potentially. For starters, again, there are lots of different things that are being looked at right now in the science, but to be real, it's still a really young area of research. And some of the stuff that's out there, I'm not going to lie, because I feel like I'm in a safe space and we're friends, but it's not good. Like the research quality is not entirely on point. Not across the board, but I'm just, because it's so young, I think that a lot of people were really eager to get something out there because of this kind of low-key panic that a lot of people were experiencing in the space. And so I challenge anybody that wants to, that hasn't yet, to go out there and just do a random search for some of the stuff that's out there specific to college student use or attitudes or, anything that has to do with like ChatGPT specifically or any sort of adjacent chatbot. And you will see a wide swath of quality. Um, but on top of that, because it's so young, there's quite a lot that hasn't been explored that you do see in other areas. So I'm going to take you through just a really brief sort of take as I sort of personally frame this when I'm thinking about the way that I want to approach this inquiry. So for starters, in terms of the ways in which the academy is sort of grappling with ChatGPT. Now, the official launch was in 2022. It's still young, right? In terms of our experience of it, but ChatGPT has already checked a lot of boxes for a lot of people in the academic landscape. So I think that we're past the point where people are just like fervently opposed to it conceptually. I think that at a certain point, people were like, oh, you know what? Yeah, there's a lot of promise here. And one of my colleagues actually made a really good sort of parallel to spell check, which I'm sort of sad to say, I kind of remember these early versions of this discussion with spell check, where When spell check was becoming more and more easily accessed, people were freaking out about like, but children will never learn how to spell because spell check. It's like, not quite how it works out. So that's one way to kind of see how this might develop over time. But what we are seeing in the current permutations of ChatGPT alone is that we definitely have a tool that is capable of performing at the level of a third-year medical student when taking the US licensing examination. That's not too shabby. It's also terrifying, but you know, if harnessed correctly, this could be really helpful to students who are trying to prepare, not students who are trying to cheat. Also, we have seen a lot of disciplines where there's standardized testing being offered for the purposes of not just licensure, but just, you know, to pass through a series of exams or to graduate with a degree. In law, in medicine, in business, we're seeing graduate level exams being passed, not necessarily with flying colors, but being passed by ChatGPT 4. Which is our most recent iteration, right? So this is what's possible. That's not to say that people are utilizing it this way. It's also not to say that people aren't, right? So in light of what I mentioned earlier as something of a panic that sort of descended on academia at the onset of ChatGPT, we have sort of this continuing undercurrent of concern, but we are seeing movement, certainly in the literature, toward feeling a little bit more comfortable. So yeah, we do see that a general consensus around professors in the literature is that we see this this notion that, well, if they have access to ChatGPT and we just let people use it willy-nilly, our students are going to cheat. Our students are going to get lazy about the work they have to do. They're going to do these things that we don't want them to do, and they're going to have ChatGPT there to enable that bad behavior, right? So, and that isn't even going into the topic of potential plagiarism, right? And then having to work through the fact that a lot of students are still struggling with understanding what plagiarism even is, let alone how to avoid doing it by way of using this tool. So that's not even going into that. That's its own conversation that could take up its own like swath of time. Also, you see a lot of educators concerned with this notion that ChatGPT in and of itself is not a trustworthy tool. It still spits out a lot of crap. And so we don't necessarily trust everything that it's generating. As such, it takes a certain content knowledge to discern what's trustworthy and what's not. And students don't typically have that content awareness. So they are more likely to trust it and therefore turn in garbage work. Also, you see that a lot of people, despite having these very real concerns, are still very much engaging with the reality of, listen, it's here, it's part of our world now. And to be fair, it's not the best idea to just squash it outright. Like, just doesn't make sense to say this is bad. It's almost like saying, you know, ChatGPT is not the problem, people are. But at the same time, ChatGPT sure makes the problem a lot easier to manifest. So while people are trying to grapple with the notion of being more thoughtful and intentional about how to work with ChatGPT and other bots in the space, it's still a difficult discussion to have, certainly at the academic level with administrators and trying to regulate that. So that's the professor side. In terms of the student side, this is the lit, right? So the students are using it fairly liberally. However, they're not blind to the notion that it's not trustworthy. Maybe they've turned something in and they've gotten that feedback, or maybe they themselves can look at it and be like, this is wrong. But that doesn't mean they didn't use it. And that doesn't mean that they didn't turn in some portion of their work that was done by a chatbot, right? So we do see uncomfortable feelings around the use of it, but it's 20th percentile, give or take. You also see people who definitely don't trust the accuracy, but we're looking at a 70th percentile group of people who are just like, I mean, yeah, it's there, I use it. And then somebody had mentioned in the previous presentation something about like, there's the academic use of ChatGPT or other chatbots, and then there's the non-academic use, and those things are intersecting pretty widely. I'll get into that in a second. Also, students have a better attitude toward ChatGPT if they're using it a lot, but not necessarily academically. What's interesting is some of the research is showing us that if a student feels more positive about chatbots and ChatGPT, they are less likely to be dependent on it. Perhaps due to the fact that being more comfortable with it conceptually makes it less of a pariah, meaning you may know more about how it works and understand it better, so it's not something that you necessarily cling to, right? Given its limitations. But that is still kind of up for debate as to why this finding is happening. And yeah, older students are less likely to use it. I think that the tech divide is one reason for that, but we're not talking like older. We're talking about like students in their later 20s versus students in their younger 20s. Like that's the difference we're talking about here. And the older students with a little bit more, let's say, academic confidence, perhaps, are less likely to be dependent on ChatGPT or other bots. And about 50% of students do consider using AI tools in general to be cheating or plagiarism. And if they're making the argument that it's not, it better be a good one because they do see it that way too, right? So the overarching outlook regarding this topic is that we have the data that says that, yeah, it's useful. We have the data on professors and the academy saying, okay, yeah, we want to lock down on this and we want to make sure that it's being done right. We want to show that we're concerned. And then we have students saying, yeah, we get it. This thing is not perfect, but I'm going to use it. So all of these different things are really not connecting up in terms of how the data doesn't seem to reflect people's attitudes. It's like, this stuff is there, but are they reading it? Do they know about it? And then what can we do to sort of bridge that gap? And one of the ways that I've sort of seen some of this data not being addressed is what I'd mentioned earlier about the fact that, okay, so professors, let's say, out of concern, will put forth certain, things in their syllabi, for instance, saying this is what you can and cannot do. This is how I want it done. If you get caught, then you're out, whatever. But in those situations, right, that's the extent of the conversation. There aren't a lot of people who are necessarily delving into discussions about, so what is a chatbot? Why am I concerned about it? Are there ways to use it that are correct? And for that matter, does the professor even know the answers to those questions themselves? So there seems to be a lot of presumption on the part of both professors and students about the way in which they are going to behave or have been behaving. And a lot of that is actually emotionally driven. So what I thought I would do is at least take a sort of initial step into that inquiry of like, so what are people experiencing when they're diving into the use of ChatGPT specifically? So the study that I conducted, and again, I'm still collecting data on, I'm sort of looking at this as an in-progress presentation, but I have some data, so at the very least, I'm not showing you like an empty box. I'm looking at not only the way that people are expressing their feelings about the use of and the concepts of ChatGPT and other bots, but also the ways in which they may juxtapose. So where do they agree and where do they disagree, right? So I do want to get to the meanings constructed by both students and professors and their emotional responses about the use of it, the notions of what it means in academy, all of that. And then hopefully, if I get good data here and the analyses give us something meaningful, we can maybe dispel some of the misconceptions that are sort of governing the way that we do our day-to-day parlance when it comes to AI use. And then, of course, providing some foundations on which to start having better conversations, right? And giving people an avenue to have that connect in terms of, this is actually how I feel about using this tool. Oh, I had no idea. That could go a long way to making people feel a lot better about their use. And then finally, guidance toward new supportive strategies from the higher administrative level. Can there be things put in place that help to support both professors and students to more ethically use these tools? So the study as it stands, I have had 11 interviews with professors. Oh, it's an interview qualitative study, by the way. 11 professors so far. Now, these interviews are anywhere between 15 and 45 minutes long. I sort of leave it as an open-ended discussion and I give them free rein. And so the same thing applies for both students and professors. And I make it very clear. It's like, listen, this is authentically a safe space that I'm creating for you. I'm not going to spill any tea. If you're a student who has used ChatGPT and you're worried about me outing you about it, please don't. It's not going to happen. I don't even know you were here. right? So hopefully I got them to be candid with me. Same thing with professors. A lot of them were really struggling with giving me like the insights that they had around their feelings of ineptitude and inadequacy specific to ChatGPT. So I don't know. Hopefully I was personable enough and I got that from them. But I have 11 professors. I have 32 students. 19 of the 32 are in their first year, some of them in their second year, and I'm at a 2-year institution, so bearing that in mind. The procedure that I utilize, like I said, first I did individual interviews with my participants, and did audio recordings for the purpose of later doing a transcription. Then after that, I do the transcription, and when I do so, I keep it verbatim. I ensure that even the little huffs and puffs and oohs and all that business I think is relevant, so I leave that in. And then I have some research assistants that work for me through my research lab, and we go through a thematic analysis of the data together. And what that means is that each of us undertakes looking at each piece of data in its own right, and we look for themes that emerge from it, and then just sort of catalog those themes. Then, as those themes are being cataloged, we see what other data also has those same themes coming up in their offerings. And then you can imagine it's a bit of a times-taking endeavor, but with 2 research assistants, it's great. The other reason it's good to have the research assistants is because we may not have an agreement on this particular sentence holding this theme or that or the other. So now we have to have a project meeting, and now we have to like hash it out. And I'm very blessed to have 2 students that work with me that are just, they're gonna hire me someday and I'm gonna work for them. They're just smarties. So I mean, I'm just really lucky, and they're phenomenal people. So we have these discussions. Oftentimes we agree, and that's when you know you're getting onto something. We're just like, I totally see that. Oh yeah, no, that's yeah. And we try to keep ourselves apart, and then we come together, and then we share. That's the means of the thematic analysis that we do. There are several versions of thematic analysis. I invite you to look at a lot of the different versions that we do in that field. I have personally done a couple of other different studies that have utilized the same, and I've found it to be very helpful. So what have I found so far? I term this in terms of convergence and divergence. So I look at the professors and the students as 2 like separate groups unto themselves, but then I also look at them together, and based on that reading of the data and all the different thematic information that arises, I try to determine, okay, so which themes are across the board showing up everywhere, which themes are specific to one group or the other. Those are the divergent themes, right? Sometimes divergent themes means they completely disagree, like they're at loggerheads with each other, like this group thought that this is blue and this group thought that this is red. That would be divergent in one sense. What I mean in terms of this version of divergence is that we are looking at something that didn't show up with the other group, but did in the other, right? So because I wanted to be cautious of time, so we've got 5 themes that have arisen thus far from the total data set. The 3 on the top are the ones that sort of bend negative, and the ones that are on the bottom are the ones that are a little bit more optimistic, positive, right? And again, this is everybody. Professors felt this way, students felt this way. Though, mind you, it may be for different reasons, but the general theme was the same. I hope that makes sense. So the top 3, everybody agrees that it's unreliable as a tool, right? Like ChatGPT will spit out some stuff and it's a little bit questionable, and you just sort of take that for what it's worth. So everybody has this mistrust. They also feel like ChatGPT is technically cheating. Across the board, everybody had a general agreement. That was about 70%. There were students, especially students, not as much the professors so far, but especially the students felt it necessary to say, well, there are situations when, right? But they would lead by saying, yeah, it's cheating. Unless, right? So the fact that they led with the notion that it's cheating as the overarching sort of theme there qualifies it. There were about 30% of, well, 30% of everybody, there was one professor kind of fell out of the line with everybody else, but in total, 70% of the folks said it's cheating. 30% were like, I don't know if I call it cheating, but it still made it into the answer, if that makes sense. not knowing enough about ChatGPT. So there was an overwhelming sense across all of our participants that seemed to indicate that people felt like they were kind of feeling their way, maybe bumbling through it, like there was more to be known. In some cases, though, I don't know that it rose necessarily to the level of its own theme, though it may, is the notion that people on the other side of the divide know more about ChatGPT, making them feel like they were at some sort of disadvantage in this like imaginary battle. But there were people who were like, okay, you know, if you, oh, this is reversed, my bad. That's supposed to go under there, and that's supposed to go under there. The the fact that people didn't know enough about ChatGPT actually resulted in more anxiety about using it in any sense, right? So from the professorial standpoint, more anxiety about even talking about it because they didn't want to feel like they didn't know what they were talking about. And then for students, just kind of like, I think I just like type stuff in here and it spits something out. Oh. And so that's what some of the students were telling us, feeling like they could have known more. Now, take that content, put it under there. So a lot of people did believe that ChatGPT could be used correctly. And I didn't necessarily push too hard on what correctly meant. Some people gave it to me, right? Some people were just like, for instance, which was lovely. And they would tell me, you know, if you use it for this kind of way or that kind of way, or if you got something from the professor that gave you paradigms that you followed and like structures, great. That didn't feel like it was an incorrect use or an unethical use. That was correct use. So people believe that there was such a thing as correct use. So that was one of the positive ones. And then the other one was the general sense that ChatGPT is helpful. And this is where I got a lot of data from people saying, you know, I use ChatGPT, just not for homework. Like when I do a search online, I get a thing that shows up and it's already telling me something, and I know that's AI generated. And I know that like one of the students was like, well, I wrote a letter to my what was it, like a council person the other day about the fact that they weren't cleaning the street in front of my apartment. And I used ChatGPT for that because I didn't want to sound like a moron. I was like, okay. And then I had one student who was talking about how they use Grammarly and didn't know if that counted. And I was like, ho, 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 right? But I mean, that's the thing. If people get sort of tunnel visioned around ChatGPT, they forget there's just umpteen other things that I think oddly seem more acceptable. But if you take a dive into Grammarly, right? So that's kind of the general vibe across all the data. So everybody's got these feelings. Now, here's where they differ. The professor side of things, there's just mistrust. They don't trust anything. So there's mistrust of students, mistrust of the tool, and then mistrust of their own abilities using the tool. Yes, but there you have it. I put the percentages here to see like how many of the folks, a full 100%, they don't trust the students to do the right thing. Now, a lot of the folks who said they didn't trust the students are apologists for the students too. They're just kind of like, bless them, they're doing their best. A lot of them are under a lot of stress, but yeah, they're gonna cheat, right? Like that kind of thing. The student side of things is interesting because it doesn't feel good. A lot of the students talk about how yeah, they use it and oh, it feels gross to do that. And also they talk about having a lot of anxiety about when to use it, when not to use it, feeling the pressure to use it because of a time crunch and deadline, whatever, and then really grappling with that and feeling a lot of anxiety. But then a lot of folks talked about like, oh my God, what a game changer, right? And a lot of the folks that said that were actually the ones that endorsed saying that they use it correctly, right? That they're not cheating. I don't see it as cheating to do an outline. I use it to do an outline. And I mean, thank God I have it to do the outline, like that kind of thing, right? I gave a couple of examples for each of those things. These are direct quotes from the data, right? And just to go through it briefly. So like the mistrust of student, this one was a little pointed. So once they know how to get to it, like once they figure out how easy it is, what's going to stop them? They're going to use it for anything. The world's going to die. Everything's going to turn to fire. Yeah, it's very, like that one was very doom and gloom. The mistrust of the tool, sometimes there's no telling what kind of stuff that thing spits out. And students will trust it, no matter how weird or wrong the result. So that's a little bit of mistrust in the student as well, but it's more focused on the tool. And then the mistrust of personal abilities. I've had zero training on this. That's awful. I know. That was right at the end of the interview with this particular participant. They were just like, I just need to say, I have a lot of strong feelings about it, but I need to be honest that I haven't taken the time. I'm like, I don't judge you. Just have a sandwich. You're fine. Now the students, that guilt piece was rampant. I didn't talk to a single student that didn't say something about feeling a little bad about it, which kind of felt good, right? It's like we want people to feel kind of bad about it. Didn't stop them, but at least they're not full-blown sociopaths. This is good. So we're thinking about how, like, okay, when I've used it, I definitely feel bad about it. And then there's qualifiers, right? Just like, but I only use it when I really have to. I don't just use it all the time when I have to, but it feels gross. It feels gross. It does. But I'm gonna do it. All right, and then the anxiety. Oh, you can't see it. Crud. Hold on, let me move me. All right. So I used to use it a little, but then I figured out I could get caught, so I stopped. So if you're wondering if that's a deterrent, if you use an app or you like for people who are still in Blackboard or something and you have something you run stuff through, it is a deterrent. And this same person went off on this whole diatribe of like, do you know what they do to you if they catch you? You get on probation. I don't need that. I'm like, okay, sir. But then you have that piece of relief, right? That feeling of like, I really am glad that this exists. I'm not gonna lie. What this student actually said, I'm not gonna lie, because this student also said things like, I really consider myself to be a really strong student. I don't think that I'm using it because I don't know my stuff, but I'm doing a lot and it really does help. It's like having a secretary. That's how they described it. And it was really interesting to see it that way. But it really helped. And her view of her use is the correct use, right? But then, of course, I do ask, like, so were you told what's correct, or how did you figure that was correct? And a lot of people are sort of formulating what's correct for themselves, right, based on their personal ethics. So they're saying things like, well, I mean, I'm not like having it write a whole paper for me or anything, just post it. Like, but they're not. But the feeling is that there is a Rubicon they don't cross, right? So like they're not they're not going as far as they could go. They're showing restraint, so it's better. And that's very common across the data so far, right? So, all right, with the like minute that I have left. Oh, can I screw this up? Okay. So the minute that I have left, in summary, um, what we're seeing in general, mistrust, anxiety, guilt, but there's hope, right? Because there is a little bit of stuff in there. People acknowledge the fact that it's not going anywhere. People do use it in other parts of their lives. And so as you're using it fundamentally correctly, or not to be, disingenuous or cheat, then, you see examples in your experience of how it can be used kind of benignly, right? And then you do see the academic benefit. It's just a question of who's going to regulate that. So I like to focus on the hope bit, but I'm an applied scientist, so this is the huge part of it for me. I have to think about like, all right, so what do I do? And communication is, I think, the big theme that's missing here. I feel like the two sides could just talk about this a little bit, maybe be honest with each other and make it safe to be honest with each other about their concerns, their fears, their 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 gratitude for ChatGPT. And I mean, I had at least half of the professors talk about their own use of ChatGPT to help them structure their lectures or to, yeah. And so it's kind of like, wow, pot, meet kettle, right? Because they did have strong feelings about how, well, knowledgeable and amazing, I can use it, but I don't know if my students are ready yet. And I was like, all right, I'm not going to ask you to grapple with that. That's for you and your therapist. But the idea was that, there's widespread use and widespread misunderstanding. And why don't we all just talk about it already? Because that a lot of this anxiety and guilt and mistrust might be mitigated with some basic conversations, which I think could be helped by administrative attitudes toward creating those structures, those opportunities, workshops, whatever, and then taking it upon ourselves, right, as people in the space. But these are my references, so I got a lot more, but these are the ones I used in here, and that's kind of it. And it's literally a minute over, and I'm so sorry. And I told you I was going to talk a lot. Anybody have any questions? I'm happy to address if you do. Yes, exactly. I think generally speaking, it doesn't seem to have been additionally quantified. I think that what this does is it gives people a place to stick all of that mistrust and label it. So it's not so much that they've reinvented the notion of cheating. There have been kids cheating forever, right? And adults that cheat, everybody cheats. But the idea that they have this thing that enables cheating or what people perceive to be cheating goes a little further in the discourse around the tool, right? So you could see how if people are so concerned about cheating, they're not necessarily going to openly engage with the ideas of how this can be helpful, right? Or leveling the playing field. That student really struck me when she was talking about it as a secretary, because she's a single mom and she's like got a 4.0 and she's got a job afterward, and she went to her job after her interview with me. So, the idea of this person having a secretary was actually a delight. If we could give her that, why wouldn't we? And isn't that leveling the playing field in a meaningful way? So to demonize this from onset is just weird and elitist. But that's just me on my soapbox. Yeah, so there you have it. Anything else? Yeah. I'm reminded of like some time ago, I stumbled